Welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Gospel Nation Christian Fellowship, where faith meets real life. I'm your host, Saran Counts, and I'm so glad you're joining us. Each episode, we dive into honest conversations, spiritual insights, and real stories that will help you grow in your walk with Christ. Whether you're at home, on the go, or gathered with your family, we invite you to go deeper with us. Let's get into today's episode. Today's episode is one that I have been looking forward to for a long time. August is National Minority Awareness Month for organ donation, and it's a chance for us to elevate the importance of organ donation, especially in the Black community, where the need is great and the barriers to access and awareness are still real. But this isn't just about health education. This is about testimony and about how God shows up in our deepest valleys, about how the gift of life literally can be the miracle someone is praying for. And that's why I'm honored to welcome our guest today, Mrs. Marsha Bonds. Marsha is a woman of great faith, vision, and compassion. She holds a master's in organizational communication and has spent decades serving her community through public education, ministry, and advocacy. Marsha is retired from St. Louis Community College and was formerly the director at North County Cares, which is an award-winning initiative supporting low-income families in the St. Louis area, and has received over 50 honors, including the What's Right with the Region Award. She also is an author and a proud mother and grandmother. But beyond all of that, she is someone who lived through the extraordinary experience of watching her husband Larry receive the gift of life, a donor heart, after months of waiting and praying. That journey and what God revealed through it is what we're here to talk about today. Marsha, welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure having you today. So, I wanted to start out a little bit talking about your late husband, Larry Bonds. Tell us a little bit about him. Tell us who he was, not just about his diagnosis, but who was he as a man, a husband, a man of faith?
Well, Larry was not always a man of faith, but he was always a very loving, confident, and generous person. I mean, generous to a fault. He was truly a giver in every sense of the word. So that came out in his character and everything that he did. Even in the days where we weren't in the church, he still had this compassion for sharing and for doing for other people. And he just was a intuitive person, great leader, great father. And once he came into the church, then it just exploded even further. He didn't change who he was, but he put all of that energy that he put into partying and all those things you do outside of God. And he poured it all into his beliefs and to other people and brought people into the kingdom. So he was a very, very fierce voice.
And I'm sure him having that fierce voice really came in handy, right? Because no one knew what was down the road for you, right?
No. And I'm reflecting back on really the early days when our children were young. And just to put it in perspective, our oldest daughter is now 55. So that kind of gives you perspective on how far back I'm going. He was always the same individual, but just he put a lot of energy. He was very confident. He said he could do things. I said, you can't do that. And he always did. He always had the driven intuition to go after things, and he was always shocking people at the doors that opened for him in spite of his uh, lack of higher ed. You know, he was a high school graduate, but he made it to the highest ranks in government just by being Larry, just a social butterfly, knowing how to talk to people, to reach people, to impress people. He was one of those kind of people. And that's, I think, what gravitated me to him, because he was this very outspoken, well-known person. And I was like I was really kind of shy and just kind of like staying in the background, which I guess complimented him, because it would have been a little bit too much for both of us to be out there like that. But yeah, great father, always thought of family first, and not just his family that he made through me, but his extended family, his mother, who was single and raised him and his her two daughters, Larry's two sisters, how he supported them. He was the man of the house at a very early age. And that's one of the things I think also too that impressed me about him, was because he was like someone who was well beyond his years. And I don't know if this is relevant or not, but he was younger than me, but he was so mature, and it was just attractive to see someone so positive and someone who always looked out for other people. That's Larry Dodge. And I'm not trying to paint a picture that there weren't some negative aspects, but he was pretty much a very positive person. And he went after what he wanted. And 90% of the time he got it. He didn't let his situation limit him in any kind of way.
He definitely sounds like an amazing person, and I'm sure that his approach to life really helped him as his health challenges began. So tell me a little bit about that. When did his health challenges begin, and how did you come to understand the seriousness of what really was happening with him?
Health challenges began probably at the turn of the century, around 2000, 2001, or so, and so forth. And Larry had secrets, and that we joked about it a lot, because we would say, "Oh, you got secrets." He didn't share his diagnosis with us. We did not know for probably a couple of years. And what he did was, he thought he was going to die, so he went and took us all on this expensive Disney trip, the top of the line resort, the top of the line. I mean, everything. Just and then we found out later that, not that he didn't enjoy it and that we didn't deserve it, but we found out later that he thought he was going to die. Once we drug the information out of him, as a family, we were able to be more proactive in saying, "You don't need that. You can't do that." Not to control him, but we had to rein him in as far as his diet and things like that. Once we found out, we became more proactive in helping him do the right things.
So he, in a way, was probably trying to protect all of you.
Yes.
So when you knew how serious the illness was, you had to go into this period of waiting, right? Waiting to see if he would get better, waiting to see what the resolution might be, a period of, emotionally and spiritually waiting to see what would happen, right? Waiting on a list or even waiting on a miracle.
He had the right doctor. He always knew, I guess he knew in his head that he had to have what he had to have. But he had great doctors. We had never imagined in a million years that he would be able to get on a transplant list and actually get a transplant. But God led him to the right people, and he was able to get with this doctor. He put him on the list, but he took him through all of the steps, because it's not like you just need a heart and you get it. There are steps, and the steps took a couple of years. Like, he had to go through this period where he was doing these infusions for his heart, so he had to have a PICC line, and that's just like a intravenous, because they can't keep using your veins. They have to put this PICC line somewhere on your chest so that they can keep drawing blood or infusing you with some stuff that will help your heart. He went through that process. Then in the spring of 2008, he hit a wall. And at that point, God just worked a miracle. There were over 100 people at the hospital, at Barnes Jewish Hospital, praying in their waiting room for Larry Barnes. His heart was so weak that they didn't expect him to make it through the night. They said the only thing they could try is this balloon test, where they would pump a balloon and see if they can get him, because his kidneys were failing too at that point. If they could get him to urinate, if they could get him to do that through pumping this balloon in his heart, they would then be able to give him what's called an LVAD. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term or not. It's called a left ventricle assist device. So what it does is help your heart to pump, and it's run by batteries. So we were on regiment, making sure batteries are charged, making sure we had batteries with us if we did outings and things like that. Well, that was the bridge to the transplant. That was in early spring of 2008. In November of 2008, they called him with a match for a heart. And during that time period, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2008, that's when Obama was running for president. I was a nervous wreck because he was out doing voter registration drives. He was at the Job Corps. He was at high schools. He was registering people at the community college. He was running all over, and he was doing what he felt like. It was almost like, I don't have a lot of time. I got to get this done. So it was that kind of attitude. He did not sit down for 1 second. He didn't have time to have pity parties or anything like that. He had stuff to do. So he did all those drives and stuff leading up to the election in 2008. And then right after the election, he got a call. And he had the transplant on his son's birthday. So on November 19th, he got a new heart. So he had a new birth on the same day his son was born.
Wow, that is such a powerful testimony. So take me back to that day when you found out that he was going to get a heart. What was that day like for you?
Well, it was in the evening. They called and we scrambled out of the bed. You know how you scramble? We were in the bed. We scrambled out of the bed and hurried up and got to the hospital. And, they still had dozens of tests and stuff they had to take. And then he had the transplant on the following day. They did a full cover story on the news because it was right at Thanksgiving, and our whole family was interviewed about what it would be like to what it's like to have your life given back to you, how thankful you would be. You know what I'm saying? How thankful we were. So it's really, really a happy time. And it wasn't all smooth because he had a long road. It was a long road. As the primary caregiver, I was all in. He knew that. So it was nothing he could even want or think about that he couldn't get, if not through me, spiritually, through his brothers at the church, his family. He had a whole host of people that were behind him.
So receiving that donor heart really did change everything, right?
It changed everything.
Tell me, how do you see organ donation itself as a spiritual act, one that truly reflects God's love and sacrificial giving?
Yes, yes. If I'm being honest, prior to this, I did not know at all about organ donation. And I think most people don't until they're impacted by it.
So, what is it you wish more people in the Black community understood about organ donation?
Well, it's not just organ donation. Because I'm used to working with, previously worked with marginalized populations, people who don't have trust for the healthcare system. They don't have trust in the police department and things like that. So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. And he was the one that was able to get out there and go to those DMVs in the areas where they were highly populated with, African Americans, and not just totally African Americans, but he was one of those people who could go in those populations and really talk to people. He said, "Hey, I'm living it. You're talking to a person that I'm alive. I'm standing here because someone allowed me to have that gift." So he really was persuasive in that area and was very instrumental in getting people signed up, which resulted in him getting a job at Mid America Transplant as a requester. So he could have just went home with his heart and lived his life, but he couldn't do that.
Yeah, that is a very powerful message. I can really speak personally about this. My older brother received a donor kidney. Gosh, I guess it's almost 2 years ago now. I can definitely resonate with a lot of what you're saying in the journey to him getting his kidney and being appreciative and the gratitude you have. But also some of the fears you have, right? While you are waiting, while you're in that waiting period. We were fortunate that he didn't need a consistent caregiver. He could still care for himself, but I can understand that as your late husband's caregiver, you probably had some times, right, that you felt the stress and have a testimony around what it's like to have that caregiver experience. So, what sustained you, emotionally, physically, and spiritually?
The love for the person, because I didn't even see it as a challenge or work. Show me what to do and I'll do it. I'll do whatever I need to do. I think the caregiver has to be someone who has the compassion to be able to really take that person from the fragile stage till they get their strength back. So it wasn't a burden for me. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I was doing what I needed to do because I wanted him whole again. And in order for him to be whole again, I had to do what I had to do. That was my responsibility, my mandate from God. So, but for some people, I could see it being a challenge. But for us, he had a family that really was behind him and a community that was really behind him.
So, if there's someone listening right now to this podcast and they're caring for a loved one, what kind of things would you say to them to encourage them?
I would say sometimes the patient will get a little bit antsy. Sometimes they feel like they're not making progress fast enough. Sometimes they'll feel like, and it depends on the temperament or the individual who you're working with. But a lot of times they feel the burden. They feel the burden, not you. They feel like you're giving up too much for them. I would say to the caregiver, if that person is, and I hate to say it this way, but it probably will, they might lash out because they're going to lash out at people when they get frustrated. And if they do, just know that that's a sign that you are an important person to them because they're going to strike at the person that's doing the most, the person that they need the most. And that's just the way it is because there will be some tough times. It's a long road ahead, but it's a good outcome and a good road to follow because that person is dependent on you to basically make them whole again. And they can't do it without you.
So, what do you hope people walk away with from this conversation?
I hope that people will understand the importance of sharing this gift. That's one of the things that I kind of touched on, but not really emphasized is that our community in particular, African Americans, we're distrustful of this process. And they need someone who can advocate, meaning the donor organizations, they need people who can go out and speak and advocate for the services. And I think that once they have a family member who is affected by this, then they understand more. But I think education, which was one of Larry's mandates, was to educate people. He had several workshops on the subject so that people would understand the value of extending your life. You're not just giving life to someone else. A part of your life is being extended. He had a way of bringing it home so that people understood and were willing to do it. Again, it is a challenge in the African American community because we think, and I'm not saying me in particular, but many African Americans think they won't have favorable outcomes, that they'll take their body parts before they through using them. That's just kind of silly to say it that way, but that's kind of how it is because they don't have trust for the healthcare system. Many don't.
That's a very great point that you brought up as well, is just the lack of trust in general the Black community has in the healthcare system, and that how that spills over into being something that could really hurt us in this area. We could end up helping someone so much more if looked at this more closely. Given the legacy of your late husband and some of the things that you're currently doing to honor him, how can the listeners support you in some of the endeavors that you still have active right now?
I'm sad to say that we have not been actively pursuing his foundation. Larry did start a foundation. Within that foundation, he provided housing. He had an apartment. What they did was they tried to identify the types of things that a recipient and their family would need during the process. So many people have to relocate from different areas of the country, or the Midwest, and they would have an apartment. Larry had an apartment for a couple of years where they could stay there free, and they provided them with that housing free of charge. He also did things like he did donor drives, so many a month. I think his goal was to do at least 10 a month, and he continued to do that. And eventually, like I said, it led him to be a formal requester, where he, in particular, they would call him to go and talk to Black families when they had a situation where the person had not signed the card to give, and the family is questioning whether they should do it. And he understood both sides of it. He understood it from the requester side, and he understood it from the recipient side. So he was very effective.
Well, Marcia, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing not just Larry's story, but for sharing your heart. You have reminded us that even in loss, we can see God's goodness. Even while we're waiting, we can still trust God's timing. We still must trust God's timing. And even in giving, we can bring life. And to our listeners, if you are moved by this conversation, please share with someone, talk to your family. Register as an organ donor, and remember that every day is a gift. Thank you so much, Marcia. It was great having this conversation with you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. We pray that you were encouraged, challenged, and inspired to keep growing in your faith. Don't forget, this journey isn't just about going deeper alone. It's about growing stronger in community. Until next time, stay rooted, stay connected, and keep going deeper with God.